Oh my goodness. Okay, we're back. We're back. It's Writing the Rapids. We took a very long hiatus because I got a new job and I moved and I'm still not done unpacking even though I've been in this house for like a month. And I'm not going to bombard you with excuses. I will only say that if we hope to be regular, patreon.com/WTR might be a good place to go. And then I'll follow that up by apologizing for being so late and promising not to hold the show hostage. I truly just let my life get out of hand. I haven't done a lot of writing, I haven't done a lot of reading, so it stands to reason I probably haven't done a lot of podcasting either. However, we are back. This is the CV Hunt interview. It happened back in the 5th month of the year, whatever that is. She was very fun to talk to. I think we talked just as much outside of the recording as we did during the recording, which hopefully is good news for the conversation itself. I hope to get her back on the show very soon. I've been talking for almost a minute and a half, and I don't want to do that. Stick around for after the conversation. She'll be reading chapter 6 from one of her books. It's very good. So without further ado, CV Hunt. All right, the first thing I kind of wanted to talk about is not your most recent book, but Ritualistic Human Sacrifice, because I got that one, and it's a book, man. It's the front of it. You said it's influenced by the writing of Alice and Bentley Little. I've not ever read Bentley Little, but I read American Psycho. So the first third, at least, of the book, I totally got the American Psycho sort of that inner monologue, just like ugliness and everything. But I got it from that sort of like weird suburban bent, which was interesting for me to see it. What was the inspiration for the book?
I had written a short story for an anthology that was for, it was a Missouri Ghost Stories. And part of they had like limitations on what you could include into the story. They said no graphic sex, no, satanic themes, and just like a bunch of things. So I wrote a ghost story, but I had fun with the characters. They were much different than the characters that are in Ritualistic Human Sacrifice. It was the first time that I actually tried to sit down and write just like a, straight horror story without like super surreal elements and, being like too jokey or anything like that. So I wrote this short story and I decided, there were all these limitations when I did that. I'm going to go back and rewrite it and like flesh it out because I had fun writing it into a full-fledged story, and it just kind of went off the rails. And I did everything that the anthology said that I couldn't do.
Yeah, the book, and then some.
Yeah.
So writing, do you get really self-conscious when you write something like that? Because I know that I do. Like whenever I have extreme violence or like even the least bit of sex in my writing, I get like, oh, I don't know.
When I first started out writing, I really did. Like the very first thing that I ever wrote, I handed to my sister-in-law, and she read it, and then she kind of came back with feedback, and she told me, she said, I liked it, but like, the graphic sex and stuff like that. She's like, do you really want your book to be like on that shelf, that not everybody's going to gravitate toward and has that extra, like, do you want it, more mainstream or something? So I kind of got self-conscious the first time that I did that, and I cut all that stuff out. And then slowly over time, I started reading just a bunch of random people, like Bret Easton Ellis and Dennis Cooper and stuff like that. I'm like, these guys are writing these things, and there's no limitations on it, and it's just like, and these are, like my idols, and I look up to these people and they're doing well for themselves, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to let any limitations, no limitations on that stuff anymore. So yeah, that I did transition from not wanting to put it in there to like, if it comes, it comes. I'm not going to whatever any limitations.
Okay, I gotcha. You cut out a little bit there, but I get your point.
Oh, sorry.
It's fine.
Yeah.
I think for some reason I feel like 16 gigs of RAM is just not enough for this computer anymore. It's like 8 years old. I got it when I graduated high school, so I'm
my computer's much like that. I've had it for about 6 years, and it's been acting a little strange lately. So
yeah. Do you discovery write then, or what's your outlining process like?
I generally will have an idea of what, like the plot. And then everything I write is first person perspective. So I'll usually sit down with a piece of paper and just like, okay, just very general things. It'll just be like, what's their name? How old are they? What do they look like? What's their occupation if they have one? Just those things. And if there's any other, characters there's going to be a lot of interaction with, I kind of do the same thing for them. But as far as like outlining, I don't do any of that. I just sit down and start writing.
Okay. So what's your rewriting process like then? Is it pretty extensive?
Usually things will grow quite a bit when I go into rewrites, just depending on its length when I'm done. I will usually set it aside for a week and then go back and just start reading through it like I were to read it like a book. And if I find like gaps or things that I think that need to be included, or, typos and all that stuff, I just start filling in the blanks and letting it grow. Usually it goes fairly quickly. The rewrites usually a week or two. Okay. And things can grow anywhere from like 3 to 10,000 words in the rewriting process.
I gotcha. Well, that feels good to talk to somebody who has published work who does stuff like how I do it.
Yeah.
That's interesting that all your stuff is in first person, though. Is that a conscious choice, or is that something else?
I tried writing third person, but I think it was just so, I don't know, like disconnected for me, that it was easier to nearly only almost do it like an actor would do it, like the method acting. I mean, in my everyday life, I'm not acting like the characters that I'm writing or anything, but to like sit down and like, just like theory of mind and kind of put yourself in that person's shoes and be like, what decisions would they be making in this situation? Okay. And just kind of go with the flow from there.
Okay. So going back to your sort of writing process, so when you were writing Ritualistic Human Sacrifice, there's the point where the character gets into the house and sees the extension, and there's like the bad smell and the black plastic bag. Did you sort of like, how fleshed out what that was and what that meant? How fleshed out was that for the rest of the piece?
Well, yeah, and that is always really weird too, because the original story was like a ghost story, and it's not like I kind of went off the rails. It was just like it was the things, like the weird things that you're like, something's just not quite right, and that's kind of like the whole momentum of the story. Once I realized, I'm like, this is not a ghost story, this is something different, and going back into rewriting process and and dealing with those elements. And it was, it was like Bentley Little, I believe. I like his writing, and he writes horror. It generally, everything starts out very kind of banal and calm and usual. And just, it starts, these little bizarre moments start trickling in, and they start getting like a little heavier and heavier. And then by the end of his books, it's just like full-fledged, things just... Yeah, it's almost like a locomotive just like stepping its way up. So, I mean, yeah, it was trying to keep the reader involved and not completely losing them. So there are those little things like leading up to, through the first part. It's just like something's not quite right here, and that's where those little pepper-ins would come from.
Okay. That's very close to how I do it too, where I'll I had a writing professor who talked about like opening and closing doors.
Oh yeah.
And that's sort of the thing where I'll open a door and then just kind of forget about it for a while and then be like, oh God, that door.
Yeah.
Okay, this is where the door goes now. Also, so you described that book as extreme horror in a couple interviews I read. Is extreme horror a thing with defined boundaries, or was that a way of couching the fact that it has lots of like sexual violence and abortion and weird, creepy, satanic sex cults?
I don't know where exactly the line would be. I mean, it's, there's like, and I'm not discounting it. It's just how I describe it. There's like your standard horror, which is, when you go to a movie theater and you watch like a standard horror movie, there's the good guys and the bad guys, and the good guys always prevail, and the bad guys are always defeated. And I think for me, like with extreme horror, it's like it goes a little bit further than what the reader might be comfortable with, like your standard person who goes to, a movie theater, watch a mainstream horror movie or something like that. They're, they know that it's just like, it's almost like that shock element, Sure. I always refer, the best way I ever describe it is like in the 90s, they had like the shock jocks who would kind of go, it's like, oh, you don't say that. You don't say that on the, like mainstream radio. That's a little too far, and that's where I kind of think like, most extreme horror writers are at that point. It's just like, that's not, that's a little too far. Like,
okay. I understand that. I also just,
yeah,
I felt like, I might have talked over you because you cut out again, but it was one of those things where I was reading it, and I don't know if this is just how I consume media these days, if I've trained myself to do this, but as I was reading it, everything just sort of made sense. It's like, oh yeah, no, like of course you would need 666 aborted fetuses to make a demon or Satan like be born on Earth. That totally makes sense to me. And,
yeah.
Like, I don't know. What I'm trying to do is rationalize the fact that the book wasn't shocking to me at all, which is not to say that I didn't enjoy the book. I really, really loved it. But like everything was just, I don't know if it was the way you presented it, or again, if it's some sort of sociopathic tendency on my part to read it and be like, oh, okay, yeah. In fact, that's an interesting thing I wanted to bring up to you is there was a lot of, especially in the first third of it, before the supernatural really starts taking hold, where it almost felt like a test for the reader of like, here are the awful things this man is doing to his wife and thinking and all of this. And I like noticed the things that felt satisfying to me versus the things that felt outrageous and really upset my sort of sensibilities as a moral or amoral human being. Yeah, there's not a question there.
Actually, I remember when I finished that book, I handed it to the person who edits my stuff, and I said, I think people are going to hate this, and I don't think anybody's going to make it past the first third of the book, honestly. And it is, I think you like hit it right on the head. It's like a weird test, because I did create the main character to be, in some people's eyes, like, a jerk, and it is like almost like, I think I told people it's like, there's the horror part of it. Sure. That's well-defined horror part of it, but also looking at like the horrors of marriage, relationships, being with a person who's not on the same page as you, that type of stuff. So yeah, it was like one of the and the line of like Bentley Little too. I feel like a lot of his stuff is like that too. It's just like, okay, like I'm going to use an example of one of his books that I just went back and reread because I used to say it was my favorite book of his, but then I read another one of his and I was like, oh, I think I actually like this one better. So I went back and reread The Association, and it's like 3/4 of the book, there isn't a whole lot going on, you know? And I felt the same way when I was reading that. It's like, it's almost like this is a test to see if I can really stay in it for the long haul and hope that it pays off in the end. And I think maybe I was kind of in that mindset when I was writing that too. It's just like, you know, can the readers even get over how jerky the main character is to even get to the quote unquote good parts or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and Eve is no angel herself.
No.
I mean, who does that? That's
no. Yeah.
That's but I mean, obviously, so like that's the trigger for him to really open the floodgates for all of the other like mini annoyances that she does every day.
Yeah.
And then I like how the book opens up in the second and third parts, and I think I have a general predilection to that aesthetic of small town occultism. Is there a term for that? Or is there small town occultism?
I just always refer to it like small town horror, because it always seems like when you have a certain story where it's like people going into a small town and everybody in the town is involved in something, I just always refer to it as like small town horror. But yeah, I'm sure there's probably some better way to describe that whole like, yeah, feeling of everybody is in on something that you don't know what's going on.
Yeah, and oh man, just like the fact that he gets saved by the transgender woman, it's like, of course, like that's how it would happen. I think that's kind of what I was getting at, like what I was saying earlier, how everything's just sort of like presented in such a matter-of-fact way that it's sort of like anti-Lovecraftian, how Lovecraft and all that cosmic horror will be like, it's so unthinkably terrible that you can't even think about how unthinkably terrible it is and all of its unthinkableness. And so that's sort of where the horror comes in, is like, it's so scary, I can't tell you how scary it is.
Yeah.
And so you say that's your first horror story, but I was looking at the titles of some of your other books before that. Like what? And I've only read that and Hold for Release Until the End of the World, so I don't have a huge context for the scope of your writing, especially since you've published like 80,000 novels.
Yeah.
So have you noticed a sort of arc in your themes or genres or voice or tone or whatever?
Yeah, I overall, there is a very almost like cynical and sarcastic tone to a lot of the stuff that I write. Not all of it, but a lot of it. So it does fall into, if there were basically, a dark or a light way to write something, it's definitely in the darker realm, and yeah, it's like, I would say, yeah, maybe a lot of cynicism is involved with nearly everything that I write, but it's also done like, I like to do kind of satirical, to be able to stand, all the situations to kind of stand back and be able to laugh at it, or write the things that I get a lot of people saying it's you kind of write the things that people want to say but never really say out loud type thing.
Okay. I've noticed from the two books that I've read, feels very misanthropic, especially Hold for Release.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's something, maybe it's something just in the books I choose to read, but that's sort of a thing where just the surreal is happening and everyone sort of accepts it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Almost like it's just a part of the world. It's not even there's something bizarre going on here. It's just part of this world. This is just happening.
And that's something that I really enjoy. It's something that I try to do. I remember when I started writing my first novel as an adult, doing things sort of surreal or absurdist things and not explaining them.
Yes.
As sort of an attack on the audience. Because, and I've told this story before, basically I was sick of writing workshop classes and decided that, like, I hate the idea of audience. I hate readers. If you're going to read my book, you're going to take it and don't ask questions. Just consume it. And so I feel like I've unwittingly placed myself into a subgenre that already existed and has, like, been existing. And whatnot. So that's, I don't know, that's fascinating to me, especially because I'm not a big community type of guy. I don't like go out looking for clubs. So it's always interesting to sort of like be popped into something or to discover something or someone and be like, oh my God, we are on the exact same wavelength.
Yeah. And I'm the same way. I will in some stories. It's just, depends on how I feel about the story. For the most part, I do not like to explain things. I don't like to explain things away. I would prefer that the reader kind of take it and interpret it however they want. You know, it's like, well, did that person die or did they live? You know, and it's just like, well, where do you want to take the story in your mind? Do you want to, you know, keep going with it however you want to do it, you know? But like, yeah, the surreal elements too. It's just like, I just want you to take it and, you know, it can mean something metaphorical, you know, it could not. It's just however the reader wants to interpret it. I kind of like it. I like to leave it open to the reader to interpret it how they want.
Yeah, I like that too. So I've also been getting into media that is very audience intensive. I've been getting into a lot of sort of these YouTube web series where there's like binary code inserted into, like, hidden into the videos and everything's a mystery and you're trying to figure out what's happening and help the characters out as the videos are getting posted and whatnot. And it's very on the very opposite end of the spectrum from how I was thinking about media even last year, where it was like, you know, reading Blake Butler or any of those types of people, where it's like, man, he describes bodies as meat. Like, she took it into her meat. And it's just like, okay, well, there you go. It's meat. And So lately my brain has been like clashing with these two ideas where it's like, okay, I just saw some static in this video that looks different from the static that has been in the previous videos for this series. So does that static mean something? What kind of static is that? And does the color scheme have something to do with something? Or is it happening in a sequence that's like Morse code or something? Clashing with the idea of like, they just got a different plugin for video glitching. On to the next one. Yeah. Where do you fall in terms of both consuming things and producing writing?
Well, for the most part, I will like consuming media and stuff. I listen to like a lot of audiobooks at my day job. But as far as like movies and things, I actually dig really deep, trying to find really maybe obscure stuff that's like not something mainstream, or like the way that it is filmed or its timeline is a little off, or it does have like a lot of surreal bits about it. Um, like I don't know, like daytime TV, you know, I don't like dramas and things like that. I actually like something that's just like, the movie is just so bizarre when you walk away from it. People are just like, I don't even know what the hell I just watched, you know, and it's just like, well, yeah, I mean, I guess you can think about it this way. I mean, I've watched movies with friends where it's like literally the credits roll and I'll have one perspective of what we just watched, and somebody else in the room will be like, well, I didn't take it like that at all. I thought it was like this, you know, like that's so like media, as far as like visual media, that's how I like to consume that. It's just like, yeah, picking things and it's not even like a pretentious thing where I want to be like, oh, have you seen this movie? Oh, of course you've not. And nothing like that. It's just like, no, it's just like I see previews. I mean, I watched a movie today, you know, in a movie theater, and it's just like, yeah, I just watched the previews and I'm like, none of this even looks remotely interesting. It's very paint by numbers story, you know. Yeah, that one's a coming of age story. That one's you know, it's just like, no, I want something that's like very visually interesting and maybe has, you know, some meaning behind, yeah, kind of like, you know, the YouTube thing is just like there's some meaning behind the imagery, and it's just not so just like, here's the story, here's the dialogue, you know, here's the picture of these people doing what they say they're going to do. It's just like, no, I just want, you know, something a little bit different.
What did you see?
Oh gosh, I'm going to get the title wrong. You Were Never Really Here.
Oh, the Joaquin Phoenix one.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Was that good? Did you like it?
I really like it too. It's really good. It's a thinker, and it's actually based on a book by an author named Jonathan Ames, who I actually enjoy his books too. They're not really like horror. That one actually was like kind of crimey.
Yeah, he's a hitman or something. I've seen very little about it.
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah, he's like a hired hitman.
Okay.
And it's like one of those things too where it's like the movie opens up and you're just not really sure what's going on. There's these flashes of images, and you know, as the movie progresses, it's like they don't tell you, you know, exactly what happened to this guy to make him the way he is. They do it in little flashes, and eventually you just have to put the puzzle pieces together.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my, I'm going to say like comfort movies are these sort of 80s movies that are very world building without so much exposition. So things like The Warriors or any sort of like sci-fi action thriller Kurt Russell was in. So either of the Escape movies or Big Trouble in Little China, that sort of thing where it's a very strange world. And Mad Max Fury Road did this really well, where they presented the world to you and had almost no exposition until like an hour and 45 minutes into it.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And
they were like, you know, they talked to the old ladies and they're like, oh, I guess we just got to drive back across the desert the same way we came. All right, let's go. But like in the costume design, there's so much storytelling. And I think that's different probably than the movie you saw, but it's that same sort of idea of you have to do some work to make the story as lush as it was meant to be. Was that movie like profoundly violent? Because the little bit I've seen about it made it look really, really violent.
Just like you said, like, you know, when you read Ritualistic Human Sacrifice, it didn't really shock you, and you don't know if it's because of the things that you watch, if you're just like a little desensitized to it. I watched it. I personally wouldn't find it very violent, but there were people in the movie theater reacting like, oh my God. You know? And it's, you know, I don't know if you want me to, I'm afraid to give any spoilers if you actually want to watch it or anything.
Yeah, no, I think your answer is adequate. I think that is something I will find very enthralling. It's just like his choice of weapons, and there's,
you know, a couple scenes when he uses that. It's, you know, it's much like, it kind of reminds me of like you said, you like the 80s movies, and I have like different categories of movies I really enjoy, and I actually like the grindhouse films.
Sure.
Like the 70s.
I could have guessed based on your press.
Based on the press.
Yeah.
But yeah, those were just kind of like, it was like that choice of weapon. It's like, yeah, you can do a movie where somebody comes out with a gun or a knife, or you can like Texas Chainsaw Massacre come out with a chainsaw, and it's just like, that movie that I just watched was kind of like that too. It's like, well, you could, if you're a hitman, you could easily just have a gun. This guy did not. He was using a very unconventional method to kill people.
Sure.
And it's just like, I think that's maybe, people think, I don't know, it's just like you just become so desensitized to watching certain films. You're just like, oh, yeah, I guess it's kind of violent, but, I've seen worse,
Yeah. Do you think that is in the coming apocalypse that people like you and me are going to do better with the horrors that will befall us when the oil wars start?
I would think so. Because I think, like the misanthropic, cynical thing. So not to sound like a huge Debbie Downer, but in my mind, it's like, yeah, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. Like mentally, you just have to be prepared for it, because when it happens, there's going to be those people standing around going, why is this happening? I don't understand. It's like, this has been ready to happen for a really long time. Like, I would think that people like me and you might be a little bit more prepared for it.
I would love to watch that TV show where it's post-apocalypse and the only two types of people left, or there's three types of people left. The people who got lucky, which are the protagonists in all of these shows and movies. Yeah. And then the like crazy libertarian Republican people who have been praying for this to happen, and then nerds.
Yeah.
Who are like, well, I was hoping it'd be a zombie apocalypse, but this, I stored up everything and I got all these socks filled with wood screws and, North Korea zombies. It's all the same thing. Yeah. Somebody make that TV show, because that is an episodic show I would watch.
Yeah.
Because the culture clash there would just be so great.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think, that would be a really good one. I always like the switching. I'm trying to think of what it was that I was watching, but it was like it was like the apocalypse basically had happened, but then you just had all these like office workers or something. And it was just like, so it was these people who, not to say pampered, but like, had never really got their hands dirty, just doing paperwork and typing away on computers and stuff. And then the apocalypse happens and it's like these people picking up whatever they can in the office to use as a weapon to fend for themselves. And I always like that weird, juxtaposition thing.
Yeah, there's a movie called Night of the Comet where a comet strikes and it basically turns everyone into zombies except for people that were shielded from the radiation. And the movie follows these two valley girls. And the first place they go is to the mall. Yeah. And they're like, oh, these people are weird. Let's go to the mall. Maybe there's something there. That was an interesting one. Let's talk about Grindhouse Press.
Okay.
Give an overview for anyone who doesn't know what that is.
Okay, Grindhouse Press. It's a small press. It was started by Anderson Prunty, and he also ran another press called Oddle. And
that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah, everybody always asks that. That's the first thing you say. How do you pronounce that? It's like Addle. It's like, no, it's Oddle, But if you look it up in the dictionary, there's really no accent anywhere, so you can kind of pronounce it however you want. But he was running both of those presses, and obviously he has his own writing, and it was just getting to be a lot, and he was trying to decide, he was going to pull the plug on one of them. And I was just like, I cannot see Grindhouse Press go. So I took it over at the beginning of 2017. It's kind of like the throwback to the Grindhouse films. As far as the things I look for and the things that we've published stuff that are kind of sci-fi-ish. Some things are kind of more extreme. Some of them are more pulpy. Some of them are more like bizarre dark fantasy, but with like, like that dark element to it. So it's doesn't really have like a super definition. We do like exploitation, but then we also do like things that will not have any graphic sex or violence in them, but just be like very, very strange and dark, and pulpy things. So that's kind of the overview of it. So it's like, it's probably really a hard sell for people because, somebody's like, I want horror. They go to a horror press and they know that every book that they buy from that press is going to be horror. This is almost like a feel. If you enjoy things that are kind of like, satirical or, kind of funny in a dark way, or, if you just want, like an extreme horror book or, some exploitation, grindhousey type thing. It's like, it's all there,
Yeah, for sure. I'm scrolling down the catalog right now, and there is a lot of that where it's like, this looks like a Bizarro novel, and this looks straight up horror. This looks sort of like your like alt lit Survivor sort of book, and just looking at the covers.
Yeah.
Do you have and I'm definitely not asking for myself. What is the you're currently close to submissions. Do you have like a reading period, or is it sort of a as needed sort of thing?
Usually I've been trying to open up every January for submissions, like the whole month of January. And then, I kind of usually read them as they come in, until I've been through everything. And then, kind of pick like my favorites, try to keep it to a minimum. But there's also, any author that's on our press knows that if they happen to come up with something that they think that is good for Grindhouse, that we're kind of open to them throughout the year. So it will be, because of that, and not putting out a ton, sometimes when I get to the submissions, I may only accept one, sometimes two, or maybe sometimes all three, like 3 for a year. And depending on how many, like in November of the previous year, somebody's like, hey, I wrote this whole thing. I think you might want to take a look at it. I've already been published with you guys. You want to take a look at it again. So, or take a look at this one for next year. So it just kind of depends. It's kind of flows back and forth.
Okay. That's something, just indie presses. I feel like it's such a strange world, and it's hard for me to wrap my head around it.
Yeah, it's like different than your traditional, publishing, and I think everybody has like their own set of rules. So it's like you can go from one press to the next and be like, submissions, the way you're supposed to submit the file, what they're looking for, all that stuff is so weird, and you just don't know. Like sometimes when your story is just like a little off, the regular beaten path or something, it's like you never know. It's like, well, I've done that before where I've had something and I thought, well, that'd be perfect for this press, and then I go read their submission guidelines. It's like, oh, well, I've done like 3 things that they say they don't want in the story. So
yeah, it's frustrating. I'm like going through one of my novels now with the intention to start sending it out, and it's so frustrating to even look. Like, not even getting to the submission part. It's just looking at these presses, and it's like, I know that you've put out books that I like, but like, I don't know if this is close enough to that or far enough away from that. And it's like, oh, it's a $3 submission fee. Like, that's not a lot, but it's not nothing.
Yeah, it's like, I don't. And then like too, it's like, when are things open? Like that's the thing, it's like you can go, and I've done this. I mean, even with Ritualistic Human Sacrifice, when I first wrote it, I was just like, I had a couple of presses in mind, and I visited 3 presses in mind, and I went to all 3 of their pages, and it's like, one of them is like, we don't want anything quiet, And I was like, well, this is definitely opens up quiet. And they were closed to submissions.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to the next one and they're like, we don't take anything unsolicited. We only take recommendations from authors that we've already worked with. I was like, oh, okay. Why do you even have a submissions page?
Yeah, it's like, oh God, I need to like make friends with all these people now.
Yeah, and then it's like, then the last one, it was just like they were just closed to submissions anyway. So it was just like, well, here I have this thing, and I'm, generally kind of impatient and know what I'm doing, and I have a good editor, and I know people who can do covers and stuff. So it's just like, I know it's essentially just self-publishing, but I'm just going to put it out through Grindhouse Press because I could, ritualistic human sacrifice, if I were actually trying to get it submitted somewhere, it probably just would have sat on my computer for a couple of years, just looking for a publisher that would, would even take a look at it or, be interested in it at all.
For sure. I remember seeing a tweet not too long ago that was sort of in that vein of like calling somebody prolific is kind of a loaded term and might not always mean what it means. Like just because someone's on a hot streak and they've had 14 stories published in the past 3 months doesn't necessarily mean that they're writing more than you or less than you.
Oh yeah, no, and it is one of those things. Like I know people who write more than me, and they just haven't found anything, any place that'll accept it. So it's like, yeah, that person's definitely more prolific than I am. They probably have 30 books ready to go. It's just like they can't find it, and and other people just can just kind of write and go, like a write and publish, and just find, how the best combo of story and press together. So.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Those people suck. I don't like them.
Yeah.
Also, this is just another strange thing. I feel like book length is something I used to really agonize about, and I don't know why. But I noticed.
Yeah.
What were you gonna say? Go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, I used to too. Yeah.
And so the submission page of Grindhouse says ideal range is between 30 to 60, and I was looking at another press a couple days ago that said generally under 50. But when I was in college, I used to all the time Google like how many words is a novel, and I would always come up with like 80 to 90.
Yeah. And when I used to Google that stuff, it was all over the place. Some people say 50,000, some people say 60. Yeah, some say 80 to 90. It's just like, no, you can't get. It's just like whoever's decided what their definition of a novel is that day and put it on a blog post is what a novel is.
And that's something for me. I at least at this point in my life, I like having a sort of end cap to a project just because it helps me, because I also don't plan things out very much or at all. It helps me to sort of know where I'm at in the story then. So if I'm writing a flash piece and I'm 200 words in, like I know where I'm at, you know?
Yeah.
So knowing, okay, I'm 25,000 words into this, and all of the presses I might want to submit a piece like this to, say 50,000 is the cap, like, okay, great, I'm halfway through, good. And that's almost one of the reasons why I love NaNoWriMo so much, is like 50,000 word novel in a month. And I know a lot of people have opinions on whether or not that can be good or bad or whatever. But it's so nice to just know like when I'm going to be done. And maybe that's a holdover from college, where it's like, you know, you have to write 350 words on the reading from last night.
With me, it's well, yeah, I used to think that everything had to be like at least 50,000 words. And yeah, I know that like you know, some people do like a deadline. Like they like that pressure of being like, I have to get this many words by this date. For me, I just lock up. I freeze, like my brain shuts down and I just panic. I'm just like, I can't do this. There's no way. It's just like too much pressure. For me, I don't like the deadlines or the, like this has to be done in 30 days thing, and it has to be a certain length. And for me too, I used to really be like, well, it's not a book unless it's like 50,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
But I've just gotten to the point where it's, I'm going to write this story. Don't know how long it's going to be. I'm going to let the characters tell the story, and it'll end when it ends. And yeah, I have things that are, 20,000 words. I have 30, 40, 50, 60, 65, I think or 67 is like my longest one. But I found that if I don't want to say which book it is, but I found if I say this book is going to be X amount of words, and then I push the story to be that the story kind of really suffers for me. I found that the story suffers because it is like this person's story isn't, X amount of words, it's less or it's more. And I think when I'm striving, it's just my personal belief, but I feel like when I'm striving for more words than what the story is naturally, coming to be, that it ends up maybe being boring for me. Like it almost like like just too much fodder, just like fodder to fill this out. And it's just like, this is all unnecessary. Do we really need to know this? Yeah. And I think the same way when I'm trying to make something shorter and it's ending up being longer, because then you end up cutting out essential things. Yeah. For me, it's just like, well, then you got to take that whole thing out, but I really like that in there. And like, so, I'm just very by the pants as far as word count and stuff like that.
Cool. That's commendable. I find another thing is, as a kid and through high school, I pretty much read just like straight up fantasy novels. And those are always so much longer. And I would buy like the collections, like the R.A. Salvatore collections, where it's 3 novels in one, so it's a 1,000-page block.
Oh yeah.
And so that's something that might be instilled with me. I find that when I do write, it does tend to be on the higher end. Like my flash fictions tend to sometimes even go over what some lit mags will accept. They'll always be like under 1,000 words, but they'll be pretty close sometimes. And maybe that's just something that's ingrained in me. Like a book is not a book unless it's got some heft to it. You know?
And I think life imitates art, and like especially like just I think whatever you read and enjoy, and that has become like your baseline when you go into writing. It's just like, well, I've read this story by this author and this story by this author and this story by this author, and they're kind of similar, or storylines or lengths or writing styles and stuff. And you're like, these are the things that I enjoy. So I would hope that people are just writing the things that they would enjoy to read. So like, if you're used to reading like 100,000 word epic, fantasy tales, I'm sure like when you go to write, it's going to be something similar to that, because like this is what you've been reading, this is what you've been practicing for. So
that's a good way to think about it. That's a good way of easing my mind. God, now that I'm all relaxed after that, like my mind has gone completely. Okay, here's one thing. In modern literature, what are you most excited about?
Oh gosh, like the coming out or more things by certain authors?
You could get that specific, or just like, are there movements that you're seeing? Are people behaving in certain ways that foretell glory on the horizon?
I think for me, maybe like, just like you said, just like people not really putting a limitation on their content, their links, being more free. And it's like, if a happy writer is writing the things that they want, like there's just no standard, I think. Or I think the standard should kind of go away of like, well, your book has to be 80,000 words and you have to submit it to an agent, and an agent has to take it to, Random House or, whatever major publisher there is. And then you have to get, everybody would love, a huge advance, and you go on, book tours or whatever. It's just like, I think, just like the kind of the surge of the small press, to me, it's like this punk rock mentality of like, you're not, you have this idea of this very mainstream thing that the major publishers want to do. So the book is sitting, on a shelf at an airport bookstore before you get on the plane, because, there's your average people going back and forth just looking for something to read. To whereas like when with the small presses, it's like all of those limitations are kind of gone, because it's like they're trying to feed like the mainstream audience. And I think like the small press is like, no, we want to do something different. We want to be punk rock. We want the covers to be edgier. We want, the stories to be different, and, maybe like a little experimental and things that, for me, it's like, you're average person that would pick up a book and be like, wow, I'm just going to get this John Grisham novel, before I get on the plane, that, it would be something they pick up and be like, I don't even understand. This is not, what is this? What am I reading? And it's just like, I think I just really would love for small press to eventually just overthrow major publishers. Just like, it's not these 5 powerhouses anymore controlling, what mainstream media people or mainstream people are reading as far as things that they pick up at the bookstore. But I just want, the small presses to come down like, that paint by numbers story, that standard length, all of that stuff, it goes. We're giving the authors more control. We're not coming back and being like, because I certainly don't. I either accept the story how it is, or I don't accept it, because it's, I always find it weird when people are like, well, my publisher came back and they said, there's too much of this in it and there's not enough of that, or we want you to change the, this plot or, change these characters or something like that. And it's just like, well, that's not the original book that author wrote. It's like, that's not them. That's not what they created. That's, completely butchered to accommodate a certain type of person. And I don't want, for us, for Grindhouse, I don't want to accommodate a certain type of person. I want a certain type of person that's looking for something different to find us, like that type of, I know I'm going on a tangent. It's like a really long thing.
No, I like it.
Yeah, it's like, I'm hoping that just like, more small presses, more authors, get to kind of control their voice that gets out into the world. I would hope that keeps growing.
I think it will.
And
I feel like this is a common thread with the world right now, is that we're getting to be this very sort of populist proletariat sort of thing where we're the big popular is no longer satisfactory, so we have to sort of filter down to what else is there. And I feel like the small press will succeed and overthrow the big powerhouse. One, because bored readers will find the new and exciting.
Yeah.
Coupled with the people who generally buy books, your suburban moms with their book clubs and your people at airports are just getting so bored with that. And there's such a wealth of other entertainment out there with, you can just watch Hulu on your phone. Like, I'd rather watch Bob's Burgers for the umpteenth time on a plane than, read the new John Grisham novel if I forget a book, So I almost feel like they'll just crumble under their own weight.
Yeah, and I think, I'm a little bit older, so when I was a teenager, there was no internet,
Mm-hmm.
and I came from a very, very small town. There wasn't even 800 people in this town. The nearest place to shop for books was 45 minutes away.
Wow.
And I had a couple, close friends, and we were just starved for entertainment, that was different, that was not, and it was a weird, bizarre trifecta between us. My one friend was obsessed with movies. My other friend was obsessed with music, and I was obsessed with books. So it was we would eventually go to the mall and just looking for these things that nobody's heard, nobody has seen, nobody has read type thing. And it was work. I would read about one book and I would have to go to that store and they wouldn't have it. And I would have to order it. And then I would wait 2 weeks for them to call me and then say that the book had come in, and then I'd have to go up and get it,
Mm-hmm.
And it's now with the internet, it's it's there. It's literally, you get on a computer and you say, what's the weirdest, book out there, or, you just surreal books or unusual horror or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll find it, and you will not only just find it, you will find a slew of it. It's just it's so easy now to, if you are really looking for something different, you will find it. You're just a click away. And it's just that's what I hope, with the small press, it's just people just I just, in my head, I have this image of somebody watching television, all the regular mainstream stuff, and they're just ugh, this is all awful. And just they would just turn to the computer and be what weird and unusual movies are there out there, and just fall into this plethora of things that they've never even heard of before, or same with books, and music too. It's this radio station, all they play is the same thing. All the radio stations playing the same song. It's just there's things like Spotify or whatever, mm-hmm. where you can just fall down a rabbit hole of, the weirdest things from countries that you would have never even imagined, but that's my hope, is that, the internet will kind of bring that to those people, and maybe those people will read or watch or, listen to those things. And then they turn to their friend and they say, oh my God, I just experienced this thing. You have to check it out too, and just like a snowball effect.
Yeah. I mean, that's how I got all of my friends to watch Eraserhead.
Yeah.
Same sort of thing.
Yeah.
And, again, man, talking about writing with people is just the greatest thing. I come to this feeling every episode at about how long we've been talking, where it's just oh God, yes. And all I want to do is sit in silence and just feel good.
Yeah.
But that's not good audio also.
Yeah.
Just dead air. I need a sounder or something. Just that.
I do the same thing. I'll go to conventions and you just spend 3 days just nonstop, talking to people about writing or movies or whatever it is, and then I just come back and I just feel completely kind of zen and pumped up at the same time. And I'm just ready to sit down with my computer and just write a book, almost even in the middle of the convention. I've been at a convention and talking to somebody one time, and they asked me what I was working on. I was well, I was thinking about doing this thing and and they actually had some feedback,
mm-hmm.
and I was just I just want to go back to my hotel room right now and start writing this story.
Yeah. There is a flash piece I've written that has that origin story, where I was talking to one of my work friends about MFA programs, and he's like, oh yeah, no, there's this story written by one of my old classmates who, like, that's for this specific school we're talking about, like, that's probably something like what they have. So I read it, and because I am the way that I am, I was like, yeah, I can do better than that. So I just like stepped away for 15 minutes, wrote something on my phone and texted it to him. And like, it's such a beautiful feeling that like you can't get otherwise. Like I feel like realtors don't do that. You know, it's like, oh man, I'm at the convention. I want to go sell a house right now.
Yeah.
Like, what do? You go accost people on the street. Do you want to buy a house? Do you want to buy a house? Somebody who wants to buy a house, come find me and we're going to go buy a house right now.
It's like sometimes I think writers just like are some kind of weird like drug addicts, you know, like they like, I don't know. Yeah. It's just like, I got to get my fix right now.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely get into states like that when I'm writing. If I'm real into what I'm writing, I'll do this like rocking back and forth or side to side sort of thing, like I'm on a boat and just almost not even know what's coming out of my fingers onto the computer.
Yeah.
And it's great. It's such a great feeling to make things like that.
I am going to read from Hold from Release Till the End of the World. It's a surreal look at a crazy city called Daxton, and with a older protagonist is a female, 40 years old. I'm going to read chapter 6. The grocery store parking lot was a nightmare of honking horns and pedestrians who either looked lost or angry as they pushed their bounty to their cars, or in some cases toward the bus stop 10 feet from the door. The horde of people was mainly comprised of angry tricentenarians dressed like teenagers from 15 fashion seasons past, or quadragenarians rode so hard on prescription pill abuse, alcoholism, and sheer depression they looked either homeless or 30 years older than what they actually were. I maneuvered my car around a homeless man standing beside an empty parking spot. He held a cardboard sign with "Will insert things in my anus for food," printed in very straight and neat script, which indicated any money given to him might actually be used for something useful, and he wasn't experiencing withdrawals from whatever drug of choice most people in Daxton chose to numb themselves with. I avoided making eye contact with the man with the sign as I exited my car and made my way quickly and cautiously across the parking lot. I dodged out of the path of a few cars with raging drivers who honked at me and screamed for me to get out of the fucking way. But escaping the rampaging paths of the pedestrians with carts was always more difficult. One woman who looked like she'd lifted herself off a barroom floor before coming to the store braced the handle of her cart, glared at me, and came rushing at me. I jumped to the right, and she corrected her cart to keep me in target. I dove to the left, fell, and did a half somersault before righting myself. She missed me and plowed the cart full force into the back of someone's car. Her head snapped in my direction and she spat, "Crazy bitch, didn't you see me? Get the fuck out of the way." "Sorry," I said, and I took off in a half jog towards the store. A woman who looked like a rabid soccer mom was next. Her bobbed and stacked hair were accentuated with multiple unnatural chunky streaks, each streak a different shade of natural hair color, none of which were her own. She braced the handle of her shopping cart like a linebacker and came barreling at me. I rolled across the hood of someone's car at the last second to avoid being hospitalized while the woman screamed, "What the fuck is the matter with you?" I managed to make it to the door without being trampled by one of the many angry shoppers as they made their way to their vehicles. I was almost hit by a car as I played a Frogger-like game at the last stretch of asphalt separating the parking lot from the semi-safety of the store sidewalk. As I reached the door, a man's voice rose out of the chaos. "Miss, miss, miss." At first I ignored him. I couldn't imagine someone using the endearing term to refer to me. Miss is what one would call a pretty and young girl, not an overweight 40-year-old woman. But the man's insistence increased as I was just about to cross over the threshold and into the store. "Miss, miss, miss." I turned and spotted a rail-thin man approaching from the direction of the bus stop. He wore a baseball cap, an oversized baseball jersey, and satiny basketball shorts. The sensors for the door I was standing in front of triggered and opened the glass doors, and I managed to move out of the way just as another shopper hurled out of the store with their cart and screamed obscenities at me. The man stopped 5 feet from me and said, "Miss, do you happen to have a cigarette?" "I'm sorry," I said. "I don't smoke." His face twisted into fury. "Well, you're a fucking bitch." "Okay," I said, and entered the store. The entryway to the store where the shopping carts were normally stored was half empty except for a handful of ransacked racks that normally house some local free papers, 3 kitty vending machines someone had shattered the glass to and emptied, and a few broken carts. I picked the cart with the most amount of wheels, which totaled 3 since the front right one was missing, and struggled with it as I entered the store. The din of the parking lot could not compare to the cacophony of noise inside the store. The first thing I was confronted with were the checkout lanes, which was a mob of cashiers and customers bitching at each other, mingled with the sounds of several wailing children. I tried to make quick work of passing the area, but the absence of the 4th wheel on my cart made moving quickly impossible. I was forced to pull back on the handle on the left side to keep the front end of the cart from dragging on the floor. At the end of the row of checkout lanes, a man wearing either a police uniform or a security uniform resembling a local police officer's uniform was beating an elderly woman relentlessly with a nightstick while she lay on the floor surrounded by broken and smashed produce, shielding herself with her arm. I passed the beating and barreled into the produce section. I threw some overpriced and wilted lettuce into the cart along with some slightly moldy tomatoes. I gave up on the produce section once a man decided to repeatedly ram his cart into mine and call me a cunt because my cart happened to be sitting in the exact spot he wanted to stand so he could stare at carrots. Next was the bread. 2 men were fistfighting in the bread aisle. There was no bread on the shelves, but several loaves were on the floor, smashed and trampled and flecked with blood as the 2 men relentlessly pounded each other's faces. The fate of the bread was becoming more compromised by the handful of other shoppers tromping down the aisle and picking through the wreckage. I became one of those people and snagged up a loaf of unmarred bread without inspecting it and later found out it was stale and moldy potato bread. I emerged from the aisle and found myself in the meat and deli section. There was a line of people shouting at the deli employees, and I spotted a person clad in black with a black umbrella, which hid their face, standing by the greenish cuts of beef, motionless. I pushed and pulled on my cart in their direction. I grabbed handfuls of random half-spoiled meat and tossed them into the cart, trying to get a look at the figure's face. I was certain it was the same person living in the shed, even though I hadn't gotten a look at their face then. But the figure managed to turn and disappear into the crowd, keeping their face hidden from me the whole time. Someone rammed my cart with their own, and I knew it was time for me to move on. We needed toilet paper, but I wasn't able to find it since the store had taken to rearranging the location where everything was stocked on a weekly basis. I did happen to find some napkins, which would have to do, after I abandoned my cart for a few brief seconds and squeezed by a group of 3 shoppers who had decided to stop in the middle of the aisle, blocking any other shopper from passing, to have a conversation. They'd become engrossed in their own conversation and grown oblivious to their surroundings. I shouted, "Excuse me," 5 times before sidling by them. I was certain I would be able to pass them without any incident because they seemed unaware of me, but one of the people from the group glared at me on the return pass while I held the napkins above my head and tried not to disturb them. I grabbed a handful of random canned goods from the shelves I passed, struggling with the integrity of my cart and fending off other aggressive shoppers, and made my way toward the end of the store. A small child sat on top of a shelf and threw cans of tuna at the shoppers, laughing hysterically if he happened to hit one in the head. He didn't manage to hit me, but he did deposit several cans in my cart. I passed a large man choking a woman as she hit him in the head with a package of diapers, and an infant wailed wildly in an abandoned cart. Once I made it to the end of the store, I knew I was at the worst part before the checkout lanes, the pharmacy. A man was shouting at someone cowering behind the counter in the pharmacy pickup area while waving around a lit cigarette. Someone with a backpack and a ski mask hopped the counter and started shoving random bottoms of pills into their bag. The other pharmacy technicians pelted the masked person with random bottles and objects within their reach. Shoppers in the rated aisles of the over-the-counter medicines and aids and bandages shouted random questions at the workers in the pharmacy. A woman shouted, "I have herpes. Will calamine make my badge stop itching?" An old man shouted, "Can I swallow suppositories? I'm not an ass pirate, and I'm not sticking anything in my ass." Another person, "I have a rash." Another, "My kid has a fever of 107. The masked man raiding the pharmacy pulled a firearm from the band of his pants and waved it around. The technicians all hit the floor. The shoppers continued their endless questioning as I hurriedly passed the havoc. "What's causing this rash? Where's the lube? My pussy is really dry. Oh God, I just shit myself." I made it to the checkout lanes before I heard the gunshots and screams. I held onto the cart handle and put my head down, anticipating what would happen next. Half of the people in the store rushed toward the doors in a panic, knocking over the display cases for energy drinks and trampling small children and the elderly in the process. Most of the shoppers online to check out abandoned their carts and joined the mob. "Amateurs," I muttered to myself. The group of people milling about on the observation deck above the front doors cheered. A woman in an evening gown, draped in expensive furs, raised her champagne glass and laughed loudly as she watched the mass of people below her. A man in a tuxedo beside her raised a paper ticket and was shouting he had the correct timestamp as a few other men around him crumbled their tickets and puffed on their cigars. A servant wearing a tux with tails approached a luxurious couple with a covered silver platter. He lifted the lid and exhibited banded stacks of cash and displayed the platter to the ticket-holding man with a flourish. The woman picked up one of the stacks of cash and rubbed it against her face with an expression of pure ecstasy, and I wasn't able to hear her over the din, but I imagined she was moaning as she did so. When the dust had cleared and the people who had rushed the doors were gone, the employees hidden under the registers slowly lifted their heads, checking to make sure it was all clear. They didn't bother to make sure the shooter was gone. The shooter most definitely had disappeared into the mob anyway. The employees were only checking to make sure the stampede was over. I wasn't the only person who'd taken their chance and stayed. One dirty and disheveled woman who had continued to haggle with the cashier about the price of a can of corn as if she were at a flea market instead of a grocery store. The dirty woman berated the cashier. "I don't care if it scans for 75 cents. I'm only paying 50 cents for that. It has a small tear in the label." The female cashier, who appeared exhausted and wore smudge blue eyeliner and had slicked back her hair into a high ponytail, emerged from under the cash register. "Ma'am, you can't barter for your groceries. These prices are ridiculous. I demand to see the manager." "You have demanded to see the manager for after every item I've scanned up to this point because you don't want to pay the sticker price. And I will give you the same answer I gave you when I scanned the previous." The cashier turned to look at her screen. 37 items. "Our manager quit over a week ago. If you have an issue, you need to call our corporate headquarters." "Fine." The cashier placed the can of corn in the accumulating bags and grabbed the next item, which appeared to be the second to the last item in the woman's order. She scanned the item, and the dirty woman went into another tirade of refusing to pay the price the computer had displayed and demanding to see the manager. I left my cart and began clearing the carts out of one lane with a waiting cashier. When the other woman was told her total, she began to haggle that price also, and then they moved on to her 20 expired coupons. Once I had all but one cart out of the way, I swept the remaining items of someone's abandoned purchase into the cart with my arm before roughly shoving the cart out of the lane. The employee stationed there was a pimple-faced kid, or maybe he was covered in meth sores. It was hard to tell anymore. He watched me with a scowl as I fought to push my three-wheeled cart through the rubble. I unloaded my cart onto the conveyor and told the cashier to start a new sale as multiple sirens grew louder outside. The customer in the other lane asked if she could write a check, and the group of people on the observation deck broke into a fit of hysterics.
So there you have it. You won't have to wait 3 months for the next one, I promise. In the next episode, I'll be talking to Dean Swinford. You can find more about CV Hunt at her website, authorcvhunt.com, or on Twitter at CV Hunt. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at noisemakerjoe. The website is noisemakerjoe.com/WTR, and of course on patreon.com/WTR. Until next time, write more and write better.